Chapter 11. The Neighbor. James' key turned in the lock at precisely 6:57 p.m., nearly 2 hours earlier than his typical Friday. The mechanical click echoed in the hallway of his apartment building, a sound so rare at this hour that it caused the door across the hall to crack open before he could even step inside. "James, is that you?" He turned to find Sophia peering through her partially open door, her dark curls tumbling over one shoulder, paintbrush still in hand. A smear of cobalt blue adorned her right cheekbone, giving her an endearingly disheveled appearance. "Hey, Sophia," he replied, summoning a polite smile despite the bone-deep exhaustion that had settled into his body. 3 consecutive 14-hour days had left him desperate for nothing more than silence and sleep. Sophia's door swung open fully, revealing her paint-splattered overalls and bare feet. "You're home early. I thought I was hallucinating when I heard your door." James shrugged, his suit jacket pulling slightly across his shoulders, a detail Sophia's artist's eye didn't miss. "Got lucky with a quiet Friday afternoon. Thought I'd escape while I could." "Taking advantage of the weekend? I'm impressed," Sophia grinned. "I was beginning to think you lived at that office." Despite his fatigue, James felt a smile tug at the corner of his mouth. Sophia had a way of drawing those out of him, genuine ones, not the careful, measured expressions he wore at work. "Come in for a drink?" she offered, gesturing toward her apartment. "I just opened a bottle of Cabernet that's begging to be shared, unless you have plans." James hesitated, his apartment door half open, the promise of solitude just steps away. The sensible choice would be to decline politely. He needed rest, not conversation. And yet, "Sure," he heard himself say. "Just one, though. I have an early morning tomorrow." Sophia's smile brightened her entire face. "Excellent. I could use a break anyway. This commission is kicking my ass." James followed her into her apartment, struck as always by how different it was from his own sterile space across the hall. Where his was minimalist to the point of austerity, a deliberate choice that made maintenance simple during his limited free time. Sophia's was an explosion of color and texture. Canvases leaned against walls, some complete, others works in progress. Plants thrived on every available surface, and the furniture was an eclectic mix of vintage finds, all somehow cohesive despite their disparate origins. "Make yourself comfortable," she called over her shoulder as she disappeared into the kitchen. "Just move anything that's in your way." James carefully shifted a sketchbook from the couch and sat down, loosening his tie with a grateful sigh. From her kitchen, he could hear the clink of glasses and the soft humming of a tune he didn't recognize. Sophia returned with 2 generously filled wine glasses, handing one to him before curling up at the opposite end of the couch, tucking her bare feet beneath her. "So, rare Friday freedom. Any big weekend plans to celebrate?" James took a sip of wine, appreciating the rich notes of blackberry and vanilla. "Nothing special. Mostly catching up on sleep and hitting the gym. What about you?" "Just finished a major commission yesterday," Sophia said, gesturing toward a wrapped canvas propped by the door. "So tonight is wine and relaxation, followed by a weekend of creative freedom." "Creative freedom?" James asked, the wine already working to dissolve the knot of tension between his shoulder blades. "When I paint what I want, instead of what pays the bills," Sophia explained with a grin. "It keeps me sane between the corporate commissions." Sophia studied him over the rim of her glass, taking in the perfect Windsor knot of his tie, now slightly loosened, the crisp lines of his custom shirt, the way his dark hair remained impeccably styled, even after a long day. Most men looked rumpled and defeated by this hour, but James Mitchell somehow managed to appear both perfectly put together and approachably human at the same time. If you're reading between the lines with her, if you feel what she's not saying, subscribe. Their chemistry only gets stronger from here. God, he's beautiful, Sophia thought, not for the first time. With his strong jawline and those deep-set eyes that seemed to hold more thoughts than he ever voiced, James could easily have graced magazine covers. Instead, he spent his days in corporate boardrooms, his movie star looks largely wasted on spreadsheets and schedules. What Sophia wouldn't give to paint him, to capture that particular blend of strength and gentleness in his features, the way his mouth curved just slightly when he was amused but trying not to show it. "How's the commission going?" James asked, nodding toward the large canvas dominating her work area. "Looks impressive." "Oh," groaned dramatically. "It's for this hedge fund guy who wants something provocative but not offensive for his office." Those were his exact words. "I'm still trying to figure out what that means." "Sounds like corporate art," James observed, "designed to suggest depth without actually containing any." Sophia laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Exactly. You have no idea how refreshing it is to talk to someone who gets it." "I spend my days in corporate America. I'm intimately familiar with the aesthetics of meaningful meaninglessness." As he spoke, Sophia couldn't help noticing the way his voice resonated. Deep without being booming, assured without being arrogant. Did he have any idea how sensual that voice was? How it seemed to vibrate at a frequency specifically designed to send shivers down a woman's spine? Probably not. That was the maddening thing about James Mitchell. He seemed completely unaware of his effect on women. For a man who noticed everything, who anticipated needs before they were voiced, who remembered preferences without being reminded, he was astonishingly blind to the way women responded to him. "I actually just finished a series of landscapes," Sophia said, gesturing towards several smaller canvases leaning against the far wall. "Nothing commercial, just passion projects I've been working on during my free time." "May I?" James asked, setting down his wineglass and moving toward the paintings. Sophia nodded, suddenly nervous as James approached her personal work. These weren't commissioned pieces designed to match someone's couch. These were expressions of her artistic vision, glimpses into how she saw the world. "These are incredible," James said softly, studying a textured seascape with genuine appreciation. "You capture light beautifully." "That's from a trip to Maine last year. There's something about northern coastal light that's impossible to replicate anywhere else." "I can see that," James nodded. "It feels honest." Sophia felt a flush of pleasure at his simple but perceptive comment. "That's exactly what I was going for. How did you know?" "Just an observation," James said with a small smile. "I don't know much about art, but I know what moves me." "Any exciting weekend plans?" Sophia asked, trying to keep her tone casual as they moved back to the couch. "Nothing special," James replied. "Gym in the morning, then catching up on some reading. You?" "There's an opening at Galerie Lumière tomorrow night. My friend Elise has 3 pieces in the show." "That sounds nice," James said politely. "You should come," Sophia suggested, trying to keep her tone casual. "There'll be free champagne. Mediocre, but free." James smiled apologetically. "I'd like to, but I've got a full day tomorrow. Maybe next time." Of course. Even on weekends, his life seemed meticulously scheduled, every hour accounted for. "The infamous weekend prep," Sophia nodded. "One day you'll have to explain to me why Miss Sharp can't prepare her own materials." "It's not that she can't, it's about efficiency. I know what she needs before she asks for it." Sophia resisted the urge to roll her eyes. She'd never met Victoria Sharp, but she'd heard enough to form a vivid picture. Beautiful, brilliant, and absolutely ruthless. The kind of woman who inspired equal parts admiration and resentment in other women. The kind who expected perfection because she herself was perfect. And here was James, defending her demands as if they were reasonable, as if spending his weekends anticipating her needs was normal part of employment rather than borderline obsession. "You know," she said carefully, "most executive assistants don't work weekends unless there's an emergency." James's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of something, defensiveness, embarrassment, crossing his features before his polite mask returned. "Miss Sharp isn't most executives." "And you're not most assistants," Sophia countered, bolder now. "You're overqualified and underutilized. Everyone knows it." If you can feel the storm brewing under this conversation, stay close. Subscribe so you don't miss where this tension takes them next. James took another sip of wine, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I'm where I need to be right now." Sophia decided to change tactics. Fine. No more career advice. Tell me about the gym instead. You must have a serious routine to maintain those shoulders." James laughed, the tension dissolving. "Nothing special, just basic weight training and cardio." Nothing special, Sophia thought incredulously, taking in the broad shoulders that tapered to a narrow waist, visible even through his perfectly tailored suit. James Mitchell was built like a Greek statue come to life, all proportion and controlled power. Nothing special indeed. "Well, whatever you're doing is working," she said, a hint of flirtation entering her voice. "Some of us have to make do with yoga and prayer." James glanced down at his wine glass, a faint flush coloring his cheeks. That was another thing about him that Sophia found endlessly charming. For all his physical perfection, he seemed genuinely embarrassed by compliments about his appearance. "He just tries to stay healthy," he said simply. "Helps with the stress." Sophia leaned forward to refill their glasses, using the movement as an excuse to study him more closely. The perfect 3-day stubble that framed his jaw wasn't an accident, nor was the precise cut of his hair or the subtle cologne that she could just barely detect when she moved closer. James Mitchell might project an air of casual indifference to his appearance, but Sophia recognized the signs of careful grooming. "So, any exciting plans for your rare free evening?" she asked, settling back into her corner of the couch. "Nothing exciting. Might actually cook something instead of ordering takeout for once." "You cook?" Sophia raised her eyebrow, trying not to imagine him moving around a kitchen, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that had featured in more than one of her private fantasies. "I can follow a recipe," he clarified with a self-deprecating smile. "Nothing Instagram-worthy, but edible." "That puts you ahead of half the population," Sophia said. "I burn water." Hard to believe an artist would struggle with creativity in the kitchen. Sophia laughed. "There's different mediums. I can tell you everything about color theory, but ask me to boil pasta and suddenly I'm helpless." James laughed again, and Sophia felt a flutter of triumph. She loved drawing that sound from him, warm and genuine, so different from the careful, professional tone he used most of the time. "What about you?" he asked. "Beyond work and art galleries, what does Sophia Reyes do for fun?" "Oh, you know," she gestured vaguely with her wineglass. "The usual Netflix binges, occasional pottery classes when I want to feel like a Renaissance woman, dancing badly at clubs with friends." "Dancing?" James looked surprised. "I wouldn't have guessed that." "Because I seem too serious?" Sophia challenged playfully. "Because you seem too coordinated. People who claim they dance badly are usually fishing for compliments." Sophia took another sip of wine, hoping the flush she felt rising was not visible on her cheeks. A year of living across the hall from him, and her crush had only intensified. Initially attracted by his obvious physical appeal, she'd grown to appreciate the quiet intelligence behind his carefully measured words, the dry humor that emerged when he relaxed, the fundamental decency that seemed rare in men as attractive as James Mitchell. "Actually, I've been meaning to ask," Sophia said, setting down her wine glass. "I'm working on this new series of portraits, and I'm looking for different faces. Would you ever consider modeling for me? Nothing weird, just a few reference photos and maybe a quick sitting." James looked surprised, and for a moment Sophia worried she'd overstepped. But then a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Me?" he asked, sounding genuinely puzzled. "I'm not exactly model material." Sophia nearly choked on her wine. Was he serious? Did James Mitchell truly not see what every woman with functioning eyesight saw when they looked at him? "You're kidding, right? You have incredible bone structure, the kind painters dream about." A faint blush touched James' cheeks, and he glanced down at his wineglass. That's flattering." "It's not flattery if it's true," Sophia insisted, emboldened by his reaction. "Your features have this classical proportion that's hard to find. Very Renaissance." "Renaissance," James repeated, looking both embarrassed and pleased. "I've never been compared to a Michelangelo before." "More Caravaggio," Sophia corrected. "Those strong contrasts, light and shadow." James glanced at his watch, a subtle but quality timepiece that Sophia suspected cost more than all her furniture combined. "That's really kind, but I should probably get going. Early start tomorrow." "Right, the gym," Sophia nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Think about the modeling offer. No pressure." "I will," James agreed, finishing his wine and standing up. He moved with an unconscious grace that made Sophia's artist's fingers itch for a pencil. "Thank you for the wine and the conversation. I needed that more than I realized." "Anytime," Sophia said, meaning it more than she should. "My door is always open. Metaphorically, not literally. That would be a security risk." James smiled at her rambling, and Sophia fought the urge to smack herself in the forehead. Why did she always babble around him? She walked him to the door, suddenly conscious of her paint-stained overalls and bare feet beside his impeccable suit and shined shoes. They were a study in contrasts, the disheveled artist and the perfectly composed corporate professional, a pairing that shouldn't work but somehow did, at least in her imagination. As Sophia opened the door for him, the elevator at the end of the hall dinged, and Mrs. Patel from 7C emerged with her arms full of grocery bags. The elderly woman's face lit up at the sight of them standing in the doorway together. "James, Sophia, how lovely to see you both," she called, approaching with a broad smile. "You make such a handsome couple." Sophia felt heat rush to her face, while James immediately stepped back, putting a careful distance between them. "Oh, we're not just neighbors," Sophia finished, trying to ignore the stab of disappointment at how quickly he'd denied any connection. Mrs. Patel looked between them, confusion briefly crossing her face before understanding dawned. "Ah, I see. Well, you would make a very nice couple, both so attractive and kind." An awkward silence settled over the hallway until James cleared his throat. "Let me help you with those bags, Mrs. Patel." "Such a gentleman," the older woman beamed, allowing James to take the heaviest bags. "Your mother raised you well." James's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, a reaction so subtle that Sophia might have missed it if she hadn't been studying his face so intently. "I'll carry these to your door," he said, smoothly changing the subject. "Thank you, dear," Mrs. Patel said, then turned to Sophia with a stage whisper that carried clearly down the hall. "If you don't snatch him up, someone else will. Men like that don't stay single long. With that parting wisdom, she followed James down the hall, leaving Sophia standing in her doorway, equal parts mortified and amused. A few minutes later, James returned, passing her door with a slightly embarrassed smile. "Sorry about that. Mrs. Patel has been trying to set me up with every woman in the building under 40 since I moved in." "No need to apologize," Sophia replied, trying to sound casual. "She means well." "She does," James agreed. "Anyway, thanks again for the wine. Have a good weekend." "You too. Don't work too hard." James gave her a final smile before disappearing into his apartment, the door closing with a soft click behind him. Sophia lingered in her doorway for a moment before returning to her own space, replaying their interaction in her mind. James Mitchell was an enigma, approachable yet distant, attentive yet aloof. Everything about him, from his meticulously maintained appearance to his careful choice of words, suggested a man who valued control and precision. And yet, there was something beneath that polished exterior, glimpses of passion, humor, and vulnerability that made her wonder what he would be like if he ever truly let his guard down. Sophia returned to her abandoned canvas, but her focus had shifted. Instead of the abstract corporate piece she was supposed to be working on, her mind kept conjuring images of James. The subtle expressions that crossed his face when he thought no one was looking, the careful way he held himself, as if constantly aware of the space he occupied. It was absurd, really. Here she was, pining after a man who seemed to devote his entire life to his career. A man who maintained his appearance with the same meticulous attention he gave to everything else in his life, not out of vanity, but as if it were simply another aspect of his professional persona. That was the thing about James Mitchell that fascinated me most. He moved through the world looking like he'd stepped out of a men's fashion magazine, yet seemed completely oblivious to the effect he had on women. Or perhaps not oblivious, but deliberately indifferent, as if his striking appearance was merely a tool, like his perfect manners or his remarkable memory, rather than something to take pleasure in. Sophia wondered what he was like beneath all that careful control. What would it take to make James Mitchell truly let go? To see him disheveled, passionate, fully present in a moment rather than always thinking 3 steps ahead? Setting down her paintbrush, Sophia walked to the window, staring out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. James Mitchell was right across the hall, so close she could knock on his door in seconds, yet emotionally distant in ways she couldn't bridge. Not yet, anyway. Sophia Reyes wasn't one to back down from a challenge. If James was worth wanting, and God was he, then he was worth pursuing. Not aggressively, not desperately, but with the same patient attention to detail she brought to her canvases. She would find a way past his carefully constructed defenses. She would capture him first with her artist's eye, if he agreed to model for her, and then, perhaps, she would discover what truly drove a man who seemed so perfect on the surface, yet so carefully guarded underneath. The idea of the portrait series hadn't been entirely spontaneous. She'd been considering it for weeks, but never found the courage to ask. Now that she had, she could already envision the paintings. James in different lights, different moods. Professional James in his perfect suit. Casual James, perhaps after a workout. Maybe, even if she was very lucky, unguarded James, the man beneath the polished exterior. With newfound determination, she returned to her canvas. She had plans to make, strategies to consider. James might be oblivious now, but Sophia was beginning to think that was by choice, rather than nature. No man that perceptive could truly be unaware of the effect he had on women, which meant there was hope. And for now, that was enough to make her smile as she picked up her paintbrush, already composing her next move in the delicate art of capturing James Mitchell. Thanks for listening. If you're hooked, subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter.